Hi there, I'm Eitan, and welcome back to the Wix Wiz. Today we're going to be talking about responsive web design in Wix Studio. First, we'll shoot off with a brief overview of what is responsive web design and a comparison to the classic Wix Editor. Then we'll hop in and talk about the very important breakpoints and how to use them. And we will finish off with an in-depth analysis of the different responsive properties that you can adjust in Elements inside of Wix Studio, and even show you how to toggle on advanced sizing for more nuanced situations. So if you want to see all that and more, let's get started. Okay, so before we get started talking about responsive design in Wix Studio specifically, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what responsive design is. So in a nutshell, responsive web design is how your website will adapt to different screen sizes. Okay, it has a fancy name, but it's actually quite a simple concept. That said, the implementation sometimes can be complex because there are many different ways that we can adapt the content of our website to different screen sizes, and it's not always straightforward how that's going to happen. So before we dive straight into Wix Studio specifically, I want to highlight the difference between the approach that Wix Classic or the Wix Editor takes and the approach that Wix Studio takes, and why it allows much more responsive design. So I've created two Yoga Studio websites based off of templates inside of Wix Studio, which you see here in front of you, and this is an example inside of the classic Wix editor. So let me go ahead and publish this site, and then I'm going to go ahead and view this actual site. Okay, so this is what it looks like on, I have, let's say, a medium-sized desktop, and if I just drag this window out and I resize a little bit, you'll see here how the website essentially adapts to the fact that my window is changing size, and the behavior when a window changes size is pretty much how different screen sizes will also adapt, or how this website more correctly will adapt to different screen sizes. So that means that if I was to have a screen size which was yay small, then I would start to see some issues with my Wix website. And you can see here that while some parts do seem to respond, so for example, this image gets slightly larger as I drag out and go to a larger screen size, mostly the sizes of my different elements are the same, and they might move a little bit right and left across the screen. So that's how the Wix Classic editor approaches responsive design, quote unquote, and it does it by not actually being so responsive, but being something called adaptive. So it'll adapt to different screen sizes, but basically you're quite confined in terms of how responsive it is, and you can choose between what we're going to call two breakpoints. Okay, so you can design your site for all screen sizes, and you also have the option to design your site specifically for mobile devices. Okay, so when somebody's loading your site on a mobile device, it will look one way, which is different to how it looks on different screen sizes, or screen version or screen breakpoint. But essentially within specifically different screen sizes, you're kind of limited in terms of the design. Whereas Wix Studio has a completely responsive editor. So let's see what that would look like on our live site. So I'm going to go here to Home, and I'm going to look for where I can see my site. Sorry, not over there. Here, Site, and View Published Site. Okay, so this is what my site, the site that I created from this template, looks like on a regular medium screen size. And if I was to go ahead and just drag that out like I did with the previous site and adjust the size, so you can see here that it is a lot more elegant in terms of how it adapts. And we really see that different things change. Okay, so the sizes of different images really get either wider or thinner, and text can change, and text can also wrap if we look around over here. So if I change the screen size, you can see that the wrapping, okay, the wrapping of the text over here really changes. And in addition to that, once I make my screen even smaller, so past a certain size, so let's say like that, you saw that the design completely changed. Okay, and that's a breakpoint in Wix Studio. And in Wix Studio, I can make several different breakpoints for different screen sizes. So that means I could also have a certain change in the design for tablet and not only for mobile and screen. And I can even have for extremely large screens and for medium-sized screens, etc. So Wix Studio essentially gives a lot more tools to make your website responsive, but still there are decisions that need to be made and there is some expertise that is needed in order to do this successfully, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the breakpoints. And you can see the breakpoints in Wix Studio up here on top. Okay, so you can see that out of the box, I come with three default breakpoints. So one is for desktop, that's what I'm on now. And here we have tablet, which is 1000 pixels and below. And we also have mobile here, which is defined as 750 and below. And I can toggle between these different breakpoints just by clicking on them. So you can see here I'm toggling between the different breakpoints. And I can also, if I choose to do so, add additional breakpoints. So I can go here, customize my breakpoints. So I can both add an additional breakpoint. So let's say I want to add a breakpoint for, let's say, a screen size of 1500 pixels and up. Okay, so I went ahead and I add that in. And you can see here that it added in an additional breakpoint for even larger screen sizes. I can also adjust the existing breakpoint. So let's say I want mobile to not start from 750, but I'd rather it start from, let's say, 650, because I think that that's a more appropriate screen size for mobile. You can see how it adjusts it over here. Okay, so I have full reign and control over these different breakpoints. But what are these different breakpoints? These are essentially screen sizes where your design will change fundamentally. Okay, so there's two levels of responsiveness here within the editor. One is fundamental change to design, and one is the design adapting or responding within a specific breakpoint. And we'll talk about both. But let's start here with the breakpoints where we're talking about fundamental change to design. So to demonstrate breakpoints, I've created this new page on my site, and I've added in two elements, one image and one text. And you can see at the moment, so I am in my desktop breakpoint, and the elements are currently stacked vertically. And if I go into, for example, tablet breakpoint, you could see that they're still stacked pretty much the same. Their size is changing, but the general layout is similar. So let's say, for example, I decide that this looks great on tablet, but on desktop, but for tablet, I want this to change up a little bit, and I actually want this text to be over here on the side. Okay, it doesn't make so much sense, the decision, but let's say that's what I want. And now let's take a step back and look at how the desktop breakpoint looks. So I'm going to go here to desktop, and you can see here that it reverted back to how it was stacked before, vertically. And in tablet, it's horizontal, and in mobile, it is horizontal as well. So this illustrates a very important principle about breakpoints, and that is that they generally cascade. So that means that any change that you make to a higher breakpoint will cascade down to the breakpoints under it. And that is why when you are building your site, first you're going to want to decide how many breakpoints your site needs, because adding additional breakpoints deep into the site design can be quite cumbersome. And furthermore, when you're designing, you'll usually want to start with the largest breakpoint and then go ahead and design the smaller breakpoints after it to make sure that you don't accidentally apply certain changes to smaller screen sizes with the expectation that they would apply to other screen sizes and forget to make changes, etc. So generally, again, you'll want to determine all of your breakpoints from the get-go and start from the largest breakpoints and go down along with the cascading logic. One of the advantages of Wix Studio is not only the fact that you can add as many breakpoints as you want, but also that you have more fine-tuned control of the behavior of elements and how they respond within a specific breakpoint. So here, for example, I am in the desktop breakpoint, and this desktop breakpoint can include many different screen sizes. So if we just take a peek here again to remind ourselves, our desktop is from 1001 pixels and up. So that means that it could be 1001 pixels, but it could also be 1200, 1300, 1500. And while I have decided that I don't want any fundamental design changes between those different screen sizes, because if I did, I would have created another breakpoint, I still might want my elements to respond slightly to the change in screen size, because an image that looks good at a certain width on a screen size of 1000 pixels might not look that great on a screen size that's much larger or smaller. And so I still want some nuanced responsiveness of my elements to different screen sizes within breakpoints, and that's what we're going to address right now. So in order to edit the responsive properties of a specific element, you can go ahead and just select the element and then go up to the upper right here where you see Open Inspector, and specifically take a look here at this design panel. And first thing you'll notice is that we have the option to set the size of a specific element. And Wix has invented this new kind of property inside of Wix Studio, which is pixel asterisks. And pixel asterisks is essentially the pixel size in this specific screen size, but essentially it is a percentage-based sizing system. So for example, if I was to adjust the viewing size of my current editor, so you can see here that at the moment I am viewing at 1280 pixels for my desktop breakpoint. But let's say I want to adjust that and view at 1100 pixels. We just go ahead and click apply, and you can see that it's made it a bit smaller. And now if I open up the inspector and I select my image over here, you can see that the size here in pixels has essentially changed. So before it was in the 480s, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, and now it's about 419. And that's because this isn't a real pixel width. For those of you who are familiar with like working with CSS and HTML, it's a dynamic pixel width. So it's a pixel width inside the current screen size that you're looking at in the editor. And this new dynamic pixel measurement is what allows the elements to essentially scale based on the screen size. So since it's a percentage, it will adapt to the screen size and will get smaller if the screen size gets smaller and larger if the screen size gets larger. That said, you might not want this behavior that comes out of the box. You might want something more nuanced. So we'll talk about different ways that you can change this and even some advanced editing settings that you can open up inside of Wix Studio, which essentially expose something, for those of you who are familiar, a little more like what was available in Editor X, so slightly more complex editing and sizing properties. Okay, so let's start off simple and see how we can adjust the responsive behavior of different elements. And it's important to remember that while I might be showing with an image or with some text, different elements in Wix might have different options here with their responsive behavior, but I think that these are good examples that will give you a good grasp of what is possible. So if we take again a look here at this image, so I've selected it, and you can see here that under the sizing panel, we have this panel over here for responsive behavior. And at the moment, it's set to scale proportionally, which essentially, if you look at this kind of diagram that Wix has right over here, you can see how, try and get an idea of what it means. You could also read inside of the Wix documentation, they have an explanation about each one of these different properties, and I'll try and give you a general idea now. But essentially, scale proportionally means that both the height and width will scale proportionally to the screen size. So if the screen size changes, both the height and width of the element will change. Whereas relative width will keep the same height, but will keep the width changing proportionally just like before. So I got distracted by this thing that popped up over here. Let's take a look at what this looks like. So for relative width, which I'm on right now, if I change this, you can see here that the width of the image is changing, but the height is not. It's a little it's a little misleading. It's like an optical illusion because the proportions of the image inside are changing, which makes it look like the whole image is changing. But essentially, you can see here that the height is fundamentally not changing. Okay, it's really like one of those psychological experiments. And if I change it back just to scale proportionally, okay, like we were on before, just to show you a comparison between the two, if I was to now scale, you could see here that the height is also changing, and you can notice that the image inside is not making any change, which indicates that the ratio between height and width is staying the same, so the image doesn't need to adjust in any way. Okay, so that's a comparison between scale proportionally and only the width. Okay, so these are already different options that you can choose depending on what you're trying to achieve with the design of your website. Let's take a look at some of the other ones here. So except for relative width, we could also do fixed. That means that essentially it will behave kind of like it would inside of the Wix Classic editor, and it won't change height or width no matter what you do with the screen size. So if I adjust this right over here, you can see that the image is staying the same size no matter what the screen size is. And again, these are just adjustments within a specific breakpoint. Let's take a look at the last option that we have here. So in addition to fixed, we have stretch. Okay, and this means that it will always try and fill its parent. Okay, the parent is the element that the element sits in. And you can kind of check this out over here if you go to the layers panel. So here you can see kind of a tree hierarchy of the relationship between all the elements on your website in the editor. And here you can see that this image sits within this section. And that's why when I chose stretch, it stretched to the entire height and width of the section. If I was to change this a little bit, so let's change it back to, let's say, scale proportionally. And I'll make this image smaller. And let me add another element here. So I'll add a container element, and I'll make it yay big, and I'll put the image inside of the container element, and then change it to be stretch. Okay? And you can see here that now it's stretched completely to the height and the width of its parent element, which is now the container, and it will retain the responsive behavior of the parent element. So for example, if our container is set to scale proportionally, then the image will also scale proportionally based on its parent's properties. In addition to the responsive behavior, we also have the option here of scale properties. And essentially what this means is if we want all of the design properties of the element to also scale proportionally to its sizing. And the example that they give here is with border, so let's demonstrate that. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to add in a border for our image. So I'm just going to make it, let's say, 5 pixels width. Let's maybe even make it bigger, 10, so that's really visible. And I'm going to change the color here. So it's this nice white border. Okay, so you could really see this border that we added in here. And currently, the design behavior is set to scale properties. So let's see what happens to this border once we try and adjust the screen size. So you can see that it's kind of getting smaller and larger proportionally to the image, which is set to scale proportionally. Let's see what happens now if we toggle that off. So I'm going to change, let me select the image again, and I'm going to change it so that it's not scaling properties by toggling this off. And now, if we adjust the size, it should stay the same 10 pixels regardless. It's a little hard to see, but you could kind of see that it is getting oversized once we make it smaller. And let me try taking a look at one of the smaller breakpoints. Yeah, so here you can see that it's really quite large relative to the image because it's preserving that 10 pixel width. But if I was to just go ahead and turn that on again, so let me just turn that on and show you again what that looks like. So that's really, it's getting smaller. It doesn't look offensively large compared to the rest of the image. Also when I jump between the different breakpoints. That's just another little trick that you can use in order to make sure that your elements are acting responsively based on the size of the element. And now I want to show you some things with regard to the text, which has some properties that this image doesn't have. So in order to demonstrate some of the special properties of the text element, I've gone ahead and I've added in some lorem ipsum just so that we have a significant amount of text to work with that can more easily demonstrate what we're trying to show here. And if I go into the responsive behavior for this text element over here, so we'll see that in addition to some of the ones that we were familiar with, such as scale proportionally, we have some that are unique. So for example, here we have wrap and hug. So if I choose wrap, okay, like that, then what will happen is that if the text exceeds the boundaries of this text box, what will happen is that it will wrap around to the next row. So let's take a look and see what that might look like. I'm just going to go ahead and drag here on the side. And you can see here that now when I make the screen kind of small, what it's trying to do is preserve the margins that it has on both sides of the text, but keep the text the same size, so something has to give, and what happens is that the text wraps around and goes to the next line. Okay, so that's wrap behavior. And let me just show you a comparison. So if this was still on scale proportionally, okay, then what would happen is it would just change the size of the font. Okay, so it won't wrap, but the font will change sizes. And there are situations where one is appropriate, there are situations where the other is appropriate, and it really depends on the design that you're trying to achieve for your site. So one more trick that I want to show you before we talk about the more advanced sizing options is stacking. And first, let me highlight what the issue is. If, for example, we have an element over here, so image, which is fixed responsive behavior, which means that it's always going to be the same size, and we have this text right under it, if I adjust the screen size, then you can see here that the spacing between the image and the text changes. And this can happen in different situations, not only in this one that I'm highlighting here. But if that kind of situation arises and we want to keep a fixed distance between two vertical elements, we have the option of using a stack, which essentially means just selecting both elements. And then we'll have this option right over here, which is stack. If I go ahead and click that, then it will add this padding here between the two elements and essentially preserve the distance between them so that they act in unison with regard to their positioning on the canvas. So now if I go ahead and I try and adjust the screen size here, you can see that the distance between the image and the text stays the same. Yes, they're moving right and left a little bit because of different other things that are involved here, but in terms of vertical distance, they are remaining the same. So the last thing that I want to talk about today is advanced sizing. And before I do that, I just want to make a point of a topic that I am skipping over here, which is quite fundamental to designing inside of Wix Studio, but I don't feel is directly related to creating responsive websites, which is our topic for today. And that is how to use different layouters to create layouts and relationships between different elements inside of the editor. If that's a topic that you feel interests you, then please do leave a comment below so I know that that's a topic for a future tutorial. So now on to the advanced sizing. So in order to activate advanced sizing, you want to select an element and then just go over here to the three dots that you see hidden here next to size. And when you click that, it will allow you to toggle on advanced sizing. And this essentially allows sizing like you might have been familiar with from Editor X if you used Editor X before. If not, just completely forget that I mentioned Editor X, and let's talk a little bit about what you can do with advanced sizing. So advanced sizing pretty much removes the asterisks from the sizing inside of the editor and lets you control in a more nuanced way how different elements will scale and adapt. So you can see here that we have more properties that have opened up. So we have width and height, which we had before, but we also have here min width, min height, max width, max height. And we also lost our drop down that was here before. Okay, because those were all parts of the simplified system that is the default in Wix Studio. And what this advanced sizing essentially opens up for us is the ability to determine what the units are that we want to measure the sizing by. So here now you could see that it's pixels, and this is real pixels. So that means that if I set it to be this pixel amount by this pixel amount, it'll essentially have a fixed scaling property, okay? And if I go ahead and I just click pixel over here, I have the option to change it to other unit types. So for example, I could do percentage. And this way I can control that the width will be by percentage and the height won't be by percentage. So that's very similar to the, I think it was not stretch, but the adjustable width or something like that. I don't remember all the names by heart, but you can see how different combinations of units do have a respective simplified version within Wix, but there are more nuanced combinations that you can create using the advanced sizing, viewport height, viewport width, different kinds of calculations, etc. So this really opens up a whole new world of more nuanced sizing that you can do, which can be important if you have a very special use case for your responsive design. If you don't, I think that Wix has created a very comfortable way of editing and making a responsive website even without activating this advanced sizing. So with that, I'm going to wrap up for today. Please let me know in the comments if you think I missed anything with regard to responsive web design in Wix Studio, or if you have any questions about Wix, Wix Studio, responsive web design, coding, and whatnot. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed and found it useful. And if you want to keep seeing my face week after week, you might consider subscribing to the channel and activating notifications or whatnot so that YouTube knows that you're interested and keeps on showing you this content. And if you do, I hope that I'll see you next time.